Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Digi-Live session today, this very first day of December 2021. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Well, I hope you enjoyed the music as well as our really insightful and practical session earlier on with Winston. Hi, my name is Paul, the editor of the CDOTrends, and I'll be with you for the next 55 minutes or so for our final panel today. For this session, we'll be talking about gaining a competitive advantage in the cloud with your data. And we have three veterans in the data and data science field who I will introduce shortly. But first of all, a really quick introduction to set the stage. Now, the ability of businesses to harness their data and innovate is more vital than ever. But data transformation is getting harder, not easier, as you might have heard earlier, in the earlier panel today, where organizations grapple with legacy systems, messy data structures, accrued and inherited over the years. So how can organizations make sense of this deluge of data to innovate and increase business agility? And how can the cloud help? Well, that's what we are here to find out. So before we start, allow me to introduce Kartik Kayan, Raja Sekharan, Senior Director, Data and AI Solutions Sales of APAC from Microsoft APAC. Now, he will give a short 10-minute presentation to set the stage for our discussion. Over to you, Kartik.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, let me just quickly share my screen and tell me when you can see it.
Okay, it looks good.
Awesome. So I'm just going to take the next 10 minutes to just walk you through what data modernization for digital innovation actually entails and what our perspective is based on working with many different customers across the region. So when people talk about digital innovation, and in the previous session, you heard a lot of discussion about how that's super critical, why that's happening, and the need for that given the current climate, where a lot of focus is being placed on automation and higher efficiencies and the like. When we think about it, it's four fundamental buckets on which digital innovation actually happens. That's on the customer angle, the employee angle, the operations side of the house, and the net new products and services that organizations put out there. And all of the work that we do with data and AI to make each of those individual domains better has to do with how much and how well we collect that information, and then what kind of machine learning and AI and analytic models come to bear to drive systems of intelligence that drive better customer experiences. And this happens all the time. Now, when we talk about unlocking that and we talk about data modernization itself, people talk about it in two different continuums. One is around the intelligent application and the journey that one has to go through to modernize the applications themselves and the data estate that backs those applications up. So that's the foundational stage. And then there is the strategic value and the capabilities that modernization and transformation journey actually drives. The way to think about it is to look at this both as two different tracks, which eventually will have to converge. And one doesn't necessarily has to look at migration and modernization of the data estate itself and also of that of the applications themselves, but both of those have to be merged together to truly drive the kind of digital innovation that is required. And that's a combination of a data strategy, a data culture, and the technical capabilities to drive all of that together. So when you have that convergence between the data intelligence that's coming from the data estate and the applications into which that intelligence can be fused into, that combination actually works really well. And I've seen that happen consistently across many different customers across Asia Pacific. To give you one simple example, there is a large conglomerate there where we've done some work in the Philippines where all of the different data estate information was brought together, and AI and machine learning models were applied on top of it, and it unearthed some very nice, interesting insight. For example, the likelihood that when a teenage daughter is accompanied by the father to the store, the likelihood of purchases is about an order of magnitude 1.8x higher than if the teenage daughter were accompanied just by the mother. So they took that in piece of intelligence and then applied it to a father-daughter shopping day and the like. So and that in turn informed additional insights and offers and programs. So to be able to do all of that, you got to get the data estate modernized, and you got to get the applications aligned against that as well. And it's a continuous feedback loop that actually makes that all work together. Now, Microsoft is a really, really large company. And some of the journey that we go through is exactly the same as what some of our larger customers go through. So maybe in the next couple of slides, I'll just talk you through our own journey itself. So when Microsoft had to do this, we had to do a modern data estate modernization for our own organization, right? And we're a very, very large organization. We had the same kind of challenges most of our customers actually face, and we embarked on this journey about 4 or 5 years ago. And we had the same vision to drive and manage data as a strategic asset. And we had internal data chaos as well, with critical internal data being copied everywhere. For example, some of our critical internal HR data sets alone had 300 first copies, right? And so we had to go through that whole journey ourselves. And we recognized what we had to do in that process. And a lot of the things that we are doing today is informed by the journey that we ourselves went on. And think about it, we moved from a volume licensing days with the smallest transaction being $400 to the smallest cloud transaction being $3 to $4, and the sheer growth in the data that our companies do. So how did we go through that? We went through a modern data estate journey that supports a centrally governed data estate platform, but it's federated in nature, right? So first, we established federated data lakes. So it was not a big banger approach, but rather a phased approach. We started with the finance data lake first. It took about 2 sprints of about 4 weeks, a team of about 4 to 5 people to deliver that data lake as a service. And we wanted to make sure that it's completely automated to align with all of our tenets and the standards. And so once that got into place, then the other data lakes started to emerge. So while centrally managed, it's a completely federated model, right? And then once we had that into place, so we had a HR data lake, a finance data lake, supply chain data lake, and each of these are federated data lakes with the central management in terms of the subscriptions and the governance. Now, after that, on that, we had to layer shared data services and shared analysis tools. Right. For the data services, our intent was to create a common configurable, reusable data services that created once, things like data quality, merge, etc., which could be used by both the publishers and the consumers, as well as by the data lakes, right? So there are a couple of key services that one needs to make that happen: a handshaking service, or controlling file service, an ingestion for compute service, data quality service. So we roll those out as shared data strategy services. And once that was in place, we moved to the next level of capability, which is around intelligence services. And there are a couple of key services that we had to put: merge and reconciliation. For example, reconciliation ensures the data in the data lake post-compute is meeting the data quality bar, etc. The merge capabilities are about being able to make sure that the Delta published files are fully provided to merge the required views, etc. So all of those, again, was built together as a common shared service model, as opposed to being done this individually in a spiked way, right? And then on top of that, we added intelligence services like variance detection, anomaly detection, etc. And so then that's the layer at which you have a feedback loop with the end user themselves, where you have an innovation lab environment in which you can work with a simulation service, which would work with the anomaly and new pattern detection services, so the users can simulate using connected data and machine learning and answer what-if type questions and understand the chain reaction and decision makes. And then on top of all of those, we had, with all the shared data service being configurable, we could now then layer on top of that shared analysis services that allows with the telemetry that is included in all of those services, we understand how the data is actually being used, how it's configured, etc. And it allows the shared analysis tools to be able to be a collaborative workbench where people can create individual views of the data. There's a data model in the data catalog, and then create some insights, share them with each other, and then use that as a very interactive workplace. So this is how we did this ourselves, right? Now, the value of doing all of this and layering in the structure is now the compute, you can take the compute nodes to actually come and focus and bring the compute to the data lake and publish post-compute data as well. So that makes it super efficient and allows the significant portion of the compute to focus on the critical workload value that they bring, right? And as a result of all of that, you end up with, at least from our perspective, what good looks like is about discipline at the core with flexibility at the edge. So the key aspects then were a centrally governed subscription model, but that controls the data store sprawl. However, the individual data lakes are individually managed. You have a compute to lake pattern and a multi-tenantable data and AI tools, and a full stack of analytic and AI tools that allows data science, et cetera, work to happen. Now, this is a journey, right? And it doesn't happen overnight. So we actually took that journey of ours and then encapsulated that into a framework, which we actually use to consult with our customers as well. And it's a 6 to 12 week journey that we work through our customers. Starts with a strategy session. Obviously, we want to anchor everything by business value, etc., and then run through a few sections of analytics maturity, understand where you are in a maturity cycle, etc., build out the use cases architecture, and then, like the earlier speaker said, figure out where the complexity and the value 2 by 2 intersect, and go after some initial use cases where we can build the value out for you, and then implement a couple of those use cases. And then ideally, we actually work with our customer to set up a center of excellence or some kind of capacity around this so that the flywheel builds energy and it keeps going. So with that, I will stop here. If you have any other questions on how you can think about that yourself, feel free to reach out. My emails are here, and I look forward to an interesting discussion on the panel today.
Thank you, Karthik. I mean, these are fascinating findings, right? I mean, that dads are more likely to buy stuff for their daughters when they go shopping. So remind me not to bring my daughters shopping too often, all right? This Christmas season. So as we jump into the discussion proper, a very quick reminder. Now, I've been told that the first 3 attendees who pose valid questions stand to walk away with a Starbucks voucher, right? So keep those questions coming through the Q&A box. And if you can respond to them during the panel discussion itself, then we will offline. All right. So without much ado, let me introduce our panelists for today. Now we have Karthik, who you already have heard from. He's the Senior Director, Data and AI Solution Sales, APAC at Microsoft. All right. So we have Ram Tilak. He's a Chief Data Scientist and Global Head of Data Science at Eastgate. And of course, we have Sean Lam, Head of Data Science, SingHealth. Now I'm going to start off with a really basic question, right? You know, when my daughter was younger, she would ask me the most simplest but the hardest question. She'll ask things like, Daddy, why is the sky blue? Right? And if you've ever tried explaining to a 4-year-old, you know that you're limited in the kind of big words you can bring along. So my question really, you know, maybe more to Ram and Sean, is really, how can organizations excel in digital innovation without data? Why and why not? Ram, I'd like to go first.
Yeah, sure. So I think we saw the session from Karthik as well. So if you see, data is something that is critical, and I find it to be the fundamental pillar for any digital innovation. So if you think about digital innovation, data comes along with it. It's not a separate part of it. So from my side, I think for any organization to excel and for them to really unlock the value that they have, data is critical, and for them to go on the innovation journey as well. Yeah.
So Ram, you talk about unlocking the value, right? I mean, could you maybe share a little bit more about some of the potential possibilities that you have seen happen?
Yeah, so one thing that we have seen is cloud as a big enabler. So I find whenever we talk about digital innovation, cloud also comes along with it. Cloud helps us to make the data and the entire landscape that we have more malleable than ever before. So the biggest challenge we had in innovation as before cloud has become ubiquitous now, before that was how do you connect everything, how do you integrate everything? And that challenge has been tackled by the use of cloud and cloud technologies. So whenever we talk about digital innovation, it's important that we have cloud included along with it, and data is something that enables everything. Yeah.
Thank you. I see Karthik nodding his head, right?
Yeah.
Cloud is the glue that joins everything together.
Yeah, I like to think of that is in terms of what is the cost of experimentation, right? I mean, like ultimately, the great insight comes from asking questions and asking questions within a business context. Always there's a cost associated with the cost of running that experiment. And I think what we have found is that with the advantages that you have in the cloud, customers are able to ask better questions and even questions that they couldn't ask before. There was another customer I worked with where they have stored 7 years worth of CCTV footage of the retail stores in tape archives for compliance reasons. And with the cloud, they just uploaded all of that tape archive into the cloud. So first they reduced cost, but what is more interesting is they were now able to use machine learning and vision to ask the question, how many of my customers smile when they leave my store? That's a question that was not possible. Well, it was possible, but it was prohibitively expensive to run that experiment. And now you're able to do that. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, just to add to that, we try and follow this principle of fail fast and learn fast, right? So for us to really do that, cloud is the way. And for us to, as Karthik mentioned, if you do this on a on-premise server or in a different environment, it's going to cost us a lot, and also doesn't make business sense to go forward with it as well. Yeah.
Well, I mean, good stuff here, right? I mean, fail fast. I mean, or succeed fast, right? So what I'm hearing here is that, you know, data and cloud together, right, basically bring the cost of experimentation lower, allowing you to ask better questions, such as whether are your customers smiling when they leave the store, right? Is it getting better over time? And I suppose, you know, are certain branches doing better? And who are the staff in those branches, you know, when more customers smile? So, and these become much cheaper with machine learning rather than, you know, trying to do it manually. So, Sean, over to you. What are your thoughts? You know, I mean, can organizations excel in innovation, you know, without data, or what role does data comes in?
Yeah, I guess this is a easier question to answer rather than why the sky is blue, right? Maybe your kid will be asking, do we need air to breathe? I guess that's very obvious. Yeah, so certainly I think it is important for us to understand, particularly our customers in healthcare. Primarily, I think you have seen how COVID has evolved. And really, there's a lot of unknowns out there. I don't think we can take any technology and just try to apply them. And in healthcare, data is kind of like our crown jewels in terms of providing the best outcome for our patients. And we do really need those. If you have heard, there is this concept called real-world data that can be translated to real-world evidence-based kind of interventions for patients. So even I guess FDA, the regulatory authorities are all looking at those kind of real-world evidence-based. So you can see that, for example, the COVID vaccine does very well, perhaps in clinical trials. What happens when you have different variants coming in? What happens in different populations? And even the clinical trials may be biased in certain populations. So I would say that data is critical, not just for us to excel, but it's critical for us to provide care for our customers.
Well, I'm sure this is a question that is top of mind, right? I mean, the borders are
Yeah.
opening and the borders are closing again. So, right. And I guess it's one of those stuff that's keeping you busy these days.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thanks for sharing. And just now I think Khalid shared about data modernization, right? And I think he plays a framework, right? And then a modern data estate. And how does it look like? And I'm just wondering, right? And what is data modernization and why is it important? I mean, I know we talk about data being hard to juggle when you have lots of legacy stuff, you have lots of improperly structured data that is lying around. But how does data modernization play a role in here? I don't know, Karthik or
Yeah, I mean, that was what I was discussing in the earlier section, right? I mean, if you notice, I didn't say anything about Microsoft or its products in that whole section because the concept is agnostic. You need to, one needs to really think about making sure that a couple of key principles that ultimately, however you embark on that journey, allows you to get to. And the destinations are characterized by a couple of key values, right? One is the notion of being able to democratize the access to the information so that you can power a data-driven culture of decision making. And that sounds like a very simple thing, but it actually requires a fair amount of work to get to that desired outcome. And that has to think about how do I make sure that the data is available? How do I make sure that that it's still being governed with the highest regard for customer data, privacy, and security? And at the same time, it is also incumbent to think about upon us in this group to think about how do you then do that and have a sense of how you would make that data be amenable to really agile modes of updates and delivery in as much as possible in real time to the people who make those kind of decisions relying on that information. And as you go through that journey, is that modern data estate one where you're able to actually understand the notions of data quality and understand how you can run agile experiments on top of that data, right? So whatever the notion of how you embark on that journey, ultimately those kind of three things are super critical when it comes to how the modernized data estate manifests itself to its end users. And we have a methodology and a framework, but the important thing is that you need to get that all worked out and sorted out, because if that's not done, then all the strategic and innovation services will just be point solutions that you drive for a very specific use case and won't be a platform approach for truly driving data and AI led innovation. That's how I view it, but I would love to hear what the other panelists think as well.
Well, Ren, can you go on?
Yeah, just to add to that, right? So I find data modernization and cloud to be mutually reinforcing in some way. So both are critical in terms of having in any organization. And this is, I think, will be different from organization to organization, especially for someone who's not very digital in a way. So there are some businesses that are not digital in the way they run. Automotive, for example, in aerospace industries. And we also have pure digital businesses like you have Grab and you have Uber, Airbnbs of the world, where everything is trackable in some way. So the modernization aspect and the strategy that we follow will depend on how mature the business and the business cycle is as well. So that should also be taken into consideration. I totally agree on the democratization part. So cloud is the way for that. There's no better way for any organization to really unlock that value and drive decision making through data without cloud. And that's a no-brainer for anyone.
Sean, you want to chip in?
Yeah, I totally agree with Ram. I think the consideration of cloud has to be in this strategy discussion. And data modernization, I think, is absolutely important for a big organization as like ours, which has multiple entities. The issue of data migration, the upgrading of the database technology and so forth, as well as the agile approach that Karthik mentioned. I think this is similar, I think, to the data lake approach that we have. We have, I think, under us more than 10 different medical institutions with 4 big hospitals. So it cannot be done in a big bang approach. And I totally appreciate what Karthik has shared. And even the individual legacy systems, I guess, they are pretty different. Not to mention the data model that has evolved over the years, the past 20 years, across all these institutions. And the ability to have a common and consistent data model, I think, is very critical in terms of an agile approach that was mentioned earlier. And all this, I think, are part and parcel of data modernization, as well as not forgetting the governance aspects that evolve very rapidly over the past few years, particularly also in the healthcare sector in Singapore. And all this really needs, I guess, a new approach to beyond thinking of the development from a waterfall phase approach, and also the use case that have to show value as well. So all these are actually absolutely critical. Yeah.
Well, I mean, what I'm hearing here is right, data modernization is a key strategy, right, to some approaches, such as to democratize data, to consider things not just like privacy, but also how do you, like Karthik shared, right, ensure there's agile updates, delivery, and as a base to, like what Sean, you said, right, to build on iterative approach to modernize, different components of the business, because you probably can't do a big bang approach for most of us because of the sheer amount of people using it and the sheer amount of data being used. Now, and there's a question from the audience, right? In fact, Winston posed a question, right? And he's asking, how do you balance data modernization and better data sharing, given modern day cyber attacks, and often with institutions or organizations with way more resources, right? So, and I wonder, it's something that the panels have considered, right? I mean, putting it on a cloud, democratizing data among the organization versus securing it. Can't say you got anything to say.
Yeah, I can take a step. Right? I mean, like it is fundamentally driven by the kind of security infrastructures and the kind of data sharing and governance policies one needs to put into place, right? To the specific question about cyber attacks and the like, my personal view is that on the cloud, it's actually much more safer, in the sense that you have the benefit of the investments that a lot of the hyperscalers are putting in to actually beef up the kind of security and cybersecurity teams that go and protect these services at scale, which if you were to do on your own, perhaps you might not have access to the same level of resources and the same level of subject matter expertise to drive some of these things. But that's just at the infrastructure level. But at the application level and at the data level, there is still an onus on individual organizations to think through those data governance policies, the data sharing policies, etc., and make sure that those are aligned really well. I mean, I always think about this in 2 different axes, whether the data is internal and external, and whether it's structured or unstructured. So you end up with 4 different buckets. So structured and unstructured on the x-axis, and internal, external on the y-axis. There are lots of good insight to be had by in each of those boxes, but also good insight to be had by sharing the data across those boxes as well. But with each of those, there is a definite need to think about data governance, data provenance, and also think about the kind of auditing and telemetry and log analytics that goes along with it, that actually allows you to have hunting capability to be forever vigilant for any kind of attacks that might arise, and take advantage of the security scale and infrastructure that cloud vendors like Microsoft provide. We do have a publicly available web page that details all of the security audits we perform, the compliances that we adhere to, the whole works, right? And I can post the link of that into the chat as well.
Ram, you were about to say something?
I think this question often pops up whenever we speak about cloud, right? So, and I just take an example of even like militaries in the US. Pentagon, for example, also uses Azure. So when for people like that, organizations like that are ready to go on cloud, then can we also do it? And as Karthik mentioned, it's about having the discipline internally to ensure that the data sharing and the data management governance is set. That's also important. But at the same time, cloud is not like a risk where you put it on the cloud and somebody can hack it from there. That's not the case anymore. I think we have matured far from that. Yeah.
Sean?
Yeah, I think that there is definitely the truth in what Karthik mentioned. I can't really establish that alone. But my feel is that if you look at the local data centers everywhere versus the cloud infrastructure, for example, Microsoft may have, I believe at least at the technology and the talent, the know-how basis in terms of data security, data cybersecurity, and so forth, there is a definite advantage. But that said, right, I do feel that in critical industries like healthcare or finance, it is likely to go a hybrid approach. There are certain data classifications that really cannot go on cloud no matter what, and you have to be. I guess it is something that is critical and have to be secured, even with respect to internal sharing. Say, for example, HIV patient data. And those sensitive conditions. And to a certain extent, I think it is an ongoing work to establish the data governance. For example, I talk about HIV, right? There are specific drugs that only HIV positive patients will take. So if you classify broadly medication data as non-sensitive, it's just medication, it could reveal what this patient has. So to a certain extent, it is not a trivial issue as well in terms of data classifications. And I think all these are important considerations. Yeah.
Right. Thanks for sharing. Right. So this is interesting part, right? That some data might technically not be private, but depending on the context, it can be way more revealing than you intend them to be. Thank you so much. And I have a question that came in from the audience, and I just throw it out right now. And this is a big question, right? The kind of the sky is blue question. How do you verify the quality of the data? I mean, we're talking about data modernization using the cloud, to modernize, to clean, presumably, your data. So how do you verify its quality? Maybe one of the panelists want to take a step, maybe Sean herself or Karthik.
Sean, you're going to say something?
No, you can go ahead. Thanks.
Yeah, I think there are several different empirical ways to do it. First would be around the quality of the insights that one gets out of it. The second would be around the provenance of the data itself. You have the right telemetry, you get a very good sense of the provenance of the data, and what led to, how did that data or insight actually come to be, and being able to track the provenance of that actually gives you a sense of the quality of the data underneath that as well. And there is also finally a human element in the loop in this equation as well, right? So because ultimately the users that are using that piece of information also have a part and to role to play in the overall feedback loop on that quality of that information as well. The most often question that most business users tend to ask is, what's the confidence interval that they can apply against an insight that's been delivered in a dashboard or from an AI-based system, right? And having the ability to expose the transference in a transparent manner, what the confidence intervals of some of these derived insights are, goes a long way in closing that feedback loop as well. And having tools and automation, right, for sure. There are plenty of ways in which you automate the ingestion, the data cleansing processes, etc. We have some tools, Azure Data Factory and things like that, which actually helps in the DQ process as well. But there are other tools out there as well. So 3 parts: automation, provenance, and making sure that the feedback loop with the end user is closed is how I would think about data quality overall.
Right. I mean, Karthik, could you elaborate a little bit more about automation? I mean, are you referring to tools that automatically, correct the data, or?
Yeah, I mean, there is plenty of work that's been done, and there are plenty of tools that are available, both in terms of data enrichment and data quality correction as well. And those are available as pluggable capabilities along the data transformation chain. So you could call those out as services from a data ingestion platform, say like Azure Databricks, and you can call those out. There is also plenty of capability that typically organizations also build in terms of the data pipelines themselves that take care of some of this as well. And in some cases, for example, in the previous session, we talked about customer data platforms and as being a key central theme. And so we have capabilities where we can actually do customer data enrichment as well by taking third-party data sources and merging them into the existing data sets to drive additional data quality and enrichment around it as well. We do that within what we call customer insights module within our product stack as well. So there is plenty of capability that helps to eliminate some of the data variability in the actual ingestion pipelines, and also afford you the ability to enhance the data with external data sources as well.
Thank you, Karthik. So it'd be interesting to hear from Ram and Sean. I mean, you guys are in the hot seat, I wanted to say, right? So how do you ensure the quality of your data?
Yeah, I think if you ask me quality, then the first question I ask is how it's captured, right? So if it's automated, then definitely the quality is more reliable. And this is something that you see whenever there's a human element involved, there's going to be a problem in the quality of the data. So, and the second important thing we also see is in terms of the entire process per se. So for us to benchmark our outcome, right? So what we do generally is whenever we find certain data is doubtful, whether it's of good quality, we involve the stakeholders and ask them, take them through the process and see if they are happy with what they see. Because at the end of the day, they are part of the day-to-day operations, they know what's happening. So that's also something that we do in the company. So bring them on board, show them the data and get their, see if it passes their smell test. And if that's good, then we also say it's good in terms of quality. Yeah.
Right. So what I'm hearing is there's a bit of collaboration, right? So you don't just close yourself in a room and just work through the data, but rather you meet up with the stakeholders, you chat with them, you get them to engage and validate certain data so that you know what a good data looks like, and you can use that you can replicate them through automation. Awesome. Sean.
Yeah, definitely. I think data quality always starts at a point where the data is captured. So at that, I think it's a critical bottleneck to resolve, and stakeholder engagement, I think, is extremely important. If you go just to the back end and you work with, say, for example, the data analyst or data scientist, you ask for everything. How important are all those additional informations and the additional burden that it actually places on the front end care for the patients? So then I wanted to bring in another point which Karthik raised, the feedback of the use cases back to the users themselves, that is at the front end, where they actually make use of whatever systems that have been developed, or ML algorithm or whatever that have been developed, that they can actually show value in the process of care, then they will be able to appreciate why the clean data, accurate data is extremely important, because this all gets through that feedback loop. If they just are asked to collect additional data for the sake of whatever additional analysis that you need to do, very frequently, I don't think they will be fully bought in, except for the cases, for example, we are reporting performance measures, performance metrics upwards to, say, for example, the health ministry. Obviously, they have to provide the right data. Finance data, for example, for subsidies, all those are fairly clean as opposed to the additional clinical and operational data. So I think stakeholder engagement is extremely important, but the stakeholders also need to see the value of them providing clean data back. That's the feedback effect that I think we will have to actually consistently shows that. And to even take this one step further, if you look at the use of personal data, if you were to ask in general, the population is pretty, there's adverse kind of reactions to the use of data beyond the primary purpose. For example, primary purpose of care, primary purpose of purchasing a cell phone, a subscription plan that they use it for marketing, right? Obviously, they say, why are you using my data for this? But if the patients themselves actually see that if we were able to use this data and show value to you in a more direct and upfront manner, I'm sure a large part of the population will say, hey, it's used to cure cancer, it's used to cure, eradicate COVID, for example. I'm more than happy to share this data for you to use it, but I have to see the value in it. But if you don't see the value, I think then there will be this constant struggle between the use of customer data beyond the primary purpose. I think in particular healthcare, beyond the primary purpose of providing care to these patients. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Sean. That's very interesting thoughts that you have shared, right? Where you mentioned that some data are fairly clean. I mean, finance data that's work on a spreadsheet tend to be more accurate than operations data. And when people see the value of data, right, they tend to make an effort to provide the data and maybe make sure that there's less typo is correct. I'm just wondering, right? And this kind of dovetail with a question that Winston asked as well. He was asking, right? Do we see data lineage becoming more important? I don't know. Do you? I mean, is there any use case or ROI to that? Karthik, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming increasingly important, particularly the nature of the expectations on the customer side has increased quite significantly. Just to tie back to the earlier point that Sean was making, one of the roles that we are being the chief digital officers, chief data officer, CTOs are being now asked to respond to is also this idea of a data ethicist. In other words, is the data being used in an ethically right way? And are the data and AI efforts proceeding in an ethical and responsible manner, right? Are the biases in your data adversely affecting one particular group over the other? So these are newer topics that are emerging in my discussions with chief technology officers and CDOs. I'm seeing that become more and more a question that they're concerned with. And so having lineage of the data helps and goes a long way in actually providing some of the transparency required in answering those questions, right? And that becomes critical in that sense, as far as I can see. Now, what are the notion of ROI on lineage? I think the notion of ROI on lineage is intricately tied to the notion of the quality of the decision making. So it's very hard to come up. So there is a risk element of it, which is what I just described. In other words, is the data being used in the most ethical fashion? So that has exposure around corporate governance and other things. And the ROI inherently is linked to the quality of the insights and the outcomes that can be derived out of it. So it's kind of a two-pronged messaging around the ROI question itself.
Thank you, Karthik. Ram, Sean, anything to add in about data lineage?
Yeah, I think data lineage is always a matter of deep concern for all of us. And the tools has to be there to be able to address that. In particular, when I think also Winston asked the question about real-world data, that real-world data is just data. But in order for it to generate evidence-based kind of outcomes, we have to go through an entire process of rigorous analysis. Even the data is important. So how are they being generated, and to what group of customers or patients and so forth, the biasness and so forth. And all these are very true concerns in terms of it restricting the idea of real-world data getting more mainstream than the more clean clinical trials approach, where you really have a whole entire history of how the trials is conducted, because real-world data is generated from real-world customer interactions. So all this, right, points to the fact that whatever results that eventually is seen at the back end, there's the need to be reproducible. If you can't find how the data gets into the model, that's gone. I think that's actually a very critical part of being able to achieve real-world evidence for us to improve care for our customers, our patients, and so forth. And that's extremely important, given also the fact that we are looking at very complex kind of care pathways and very diverse groups of customers, and also the departments that the data originates from. And that's where I think the automation part, the part that is built into the system, I think that's where it actually holds a lot of value. In the past, I think the previous speaker also mentioned a lot of analysts are just using Excel. Excel is the worst in terms of data lineage. You don't know what the hell is going on behind the data, how it's being transformed and so forth. Yeah, so that's my thoughts. Yeah.
Not just Excel, right? I mean, you have a Word document, you can try to track changes, but after a while, it gets so messy, you're not really sure what changed.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think, especially on Karthik's point on ethics, right? So this is something that we are seeing as a recurring theme amongst customers as well. So especially when they are sometimes okay to share the data, but they also want to know how we are going to use the data, right? So if you remember, I think Apple and Google both are trying to remove third-party cookies on their websites, primarily because of the misuse that's happening in some parts of the world, where they try and take for one reason, but they use it for many other reasons. So this is going to be fundamentally important. And I see also auditing firms in the future start looking at models, because everything in the business is going to be done using algorithms. So auditing firms will start looking at how biased is your model, what kind of decisions is it making? Does it really lead to a focused or a not a normal decision in terms of what's happening? So all of this is going to definitely come. And when we use data in our company, also we have an ethics review with a legal committee before we build an algorithm to ensure that that is done properly. And for this, lineage is the one that powers us to do it.
Well, I mean, I didn't expect that, there's so many users of data lineage. I mean, realistically, it's just how the data flows, right, from one end to the other and keeping track of it. But it looks like there's implications all around in terms of applying it to ethics, applying it to, to differentiate between real world and data, and which is messy, and trials, which tend to be cleaner in a certain way. So it looks like there's not much of implications to think about. And I want to move on to my next question, because our time is quickly running out. And I'm just wondering, right? We talk about cloud just now, and we talk about, I think Karthik talked about using AI to process video analytics to see, which customers leave the restaurant happy. So question, right? And I want to throw it to every one of the panelists. How can we leverage AI and data in the cloud? I mean, what are some other possibilities that, maybe you guys are already thinking about, working on, or you have heard about? Nikati, want to go first?
Sure. There's only been a growth in the kind of use cases that are potentially accessible, right? I always think of all of these use cases as augmentation of human capacity and capability, and they fall into some major buckets. One, and it falls right along the kind of machine learning advances we have made around vision, speech, and semantic understandings, and the automation possibilities that emerge from those are applicable across a whole range of domains. For example, in the light of COVID, we have been working with a few banks across ASEAN, where the traditional trade finance process, where two parties would send documentation to the bank to actually get a letter of credit. It's a very cumbersome manual process. What the banks are looking to do is to take all of the documentation, like the contracts between the two trading parties, the bill of lading, et cetera, and automatically fill up 80% of the form by just reading the text. And that's just not pure just understanding what text is in the image, but it's also understanding the context, because the same entity, which is a contract number, could be described differently in different documents. So taking this set of unseen, unknown documents, extracting the text out of it, applying an ontology model against it, and then relevantly picking out the contextual information and automating 80% of the form filling. There's still a human element, because there's still a human being who has to then go and look at it and verify it, but 80% of the job is done, right? So that is the kind of augmentation of human capacity as use cases that we're seeing happen right across the different industries. The same thing applies in the case of manufacturing. It's about inspection, a bunch of other cases that are happening. So try to think about it. Where do we augment repetitive human tasks with capability that comes from speech, text, and semantic understanding? And how does that actually work? So in my view, the use cases are quite limitless. We actually have one drone company which is helping some of our customers around ASEAN actually look at the health of the palm plantations and decide when the palm is ready for harvest and so on. So in my view, the automation capabilities to augment human capacity are quite limitless. It's only bounded by the kind of use cases we can think of. But I would love to hear what Ram and Sean think as well.
Yeah, so just to add to that, right? So I think limitless is properly the word, and we also find that there are so many opportunities when we move to cloud and leverage cloud. And so for me, I think the past 6 months we've been able to do a cloud first strategy across the board, and that has helped us productionize maybe 15 use cases that's been on the shelf for the last 1 or 2 years, because we do not have the integration capability or the ability to take it to the business and to empower them with the information or the insight that we have from the model. So this, I think, definitely, without doubt, cloud is the solution, and it's non-negotiable. If you ask me, if you want to do data and AI, you need the cloud. So otherwise, it's very difficult for you to move fast.
So AI and cloud comes together.
Yeah.
I kind of agree that it is limitless, but we are actually starting from a very low base. I think we are still trying to also, in the next few months, establish a cloud strategy. The use cases that I could think of, I think, hovers around the idea of cross-border collaboration, cross-country collaboration. We need those, particularly when we talk about the use of data across various population groups, various different types of hospital systems, healthcare systems. And we did have some demonstration of such collaboration, and also provided the fact that we need to have data residency. That means the data that we generate in Singapore has to stay in Singapore. So the cloud offers that kind of flexibility as well. And also being able to adhere to or comply with the other partnering institutes, country, national regulations and policies. So those are very I think low-hanging fruits that we can actually show value, the value of cloud. And then the other part is in terms of rapid development and deployment of applications. Being able to deploy applications on the cloud, I think is actually very, very efficient nowadays, because a lot of those security frameworks, application-centric kind of deployment, container-based kind of deployment, they are all available. And compared to the traditional approach, where for new applications that we need to bring into the enterprise infrastructure, that could take months. First, it has to clear the enterprise kind of security committee and so forth, strategy committees. But being able to go on cloud and be able to test on multiple different institutions across different countries, I think it fundamentally changes the game. So we can show value very fast. And then the question is, if we really need to bring into enterprise infrastructure, then we put in the resources to bring it in. But that is actually far more intensive than actually just going to the cloud. Yeah, so these are the two of the use cases that we think of.
Right. I mean, it's really good to hear that, you know, the cloud offers a lot more possibilities for rapid development, and I guess data residency isn't the problem that it used to be. I mean, I think all the cloud players, including Microsoft Azure, has facilities in Singapore, right? And how it basically, you know, accelerates, you know, all the deployments and you know, the ability to leverage different AI models. Well, it's been a really, really fun, I think really engaging discussion. I wish we can talk forever. Unfortunately, the clock don't agree. So, you know, thank you so much for joining us, our panelists, and for all our attendees who came in today. I just want to take this time to hand over to our CEO, Jonathan, who will be giving the closing remark. Jonathan, over to you.
Great, thanks for that, Paul. Thanks for your valuable input on data modernization from Sean, Ram, and Karthik from Microsoft. I think we're all wondering now and going to start doing a study on whether dads really do buy 1.8 times as much with their daughters as their moms do. I think we're all going to have a bit of a check on that. And I really appreciate you setting a high bar for building platforms for data solutions across an organization instead of just point solutions. I think that was a really, really great insight. And thanks to the earlier session as well, the food for thought from Dr. Chu and Joseph from Informatica, really useful ideas on how master data management and customer experience enhancement can drive positive business outcomes, like getting a loan from in 3 days as opposed to 4 to 6 weeks from Union Bank. I think I'll change bank if Union Bank can go globally, actually, instead of just in the Philippines. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed our 7th installment of our CDOTrends Digi-Live series, where we delve deeply into specific technology and topic around digital and data initiatives. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Informatica and Microsoft, and encourage any of you updating your data modernization or customer experience journey to reach out to them. They have years of experience and lots of great client case studies they can share with you. This concludes our session for today, but I would like you to ask you to do 2 things before leaving. Please mark in your calendars our upcoming CDOTrends Digi-Live. It's another one of these coming up on March 24 on doing digital better. And also, if you're in Hong Kong, we are going to be doing a live digital CMO event. And then our big CDO Asia Summit comes up on May 18 in Singapore. That will be hybrid. So those of you in Singapore have the opportunity to join it live, or if you're in other markets and can't travel, you can be watching that through a hybrid session as well. So please mark those on your calendar. And if you could do one more thing for us, if you want to switch this slide, Daniel, if you could scan the QR code, we'd really like to hear your feedback on the events. This is the 7th in our series of the Digi-Live events. And we do want your feedback in your market if you are looking to be open to join live events now. I know we're just starting to really get a feel for that. In Hong Kong, we did a live, larger event. Actually, it was a hybrid event. And we are starting to see that come back a bit, but we'd like to know your feedback. So just please take 2 or 3 minutes. I think there's 6 or 7 questions. Give us your ideas on future topics and how we might improve on these. And then really just like to thank you for joining. Thank you for sparing your valuable time, and stay healthy. And I look forward to our next session together. Thank you very much.